I'd like to introduce the panel, first of all. I have Roula there, who's the Middle East editor of the Financial Times. You were in North Africa, you started, didn't you? But you did an awful lot, obviously, everywhere else in Lebanon. Mohammed Shabaro, who's from Shabaro, who's from Al Arabiya, the London correspondent, and Badia Alamuddin, I didn't want to pronounce it incorrectly, who is the foreign editor of Al Hayat and is Lebanese. Now, on the thing that you've seen, we're starting by looking at what's been going on in the last month or two in the camp in Tripoli. Now, we were hearing yesterday that it might be over. What do you think of that? I mean, is this just rhetoric from the Lebanese government, or is this real?
I think the Lebanese government communique was clear. It was misinterpreted again by the media. People wanted to jump to conclusion. After 34 days, I wanted to say it's over. What it said actually, that the major offensive has ended now in the new camp, and that, you know, mopping up operations continue. And if, you know, the conditions of the army were not met, then they would, you know, continue their attacks as necessary. But for the moment, what they said was that they have taken the position that they wanted to take, and that unless the camp officials hand over the wanted men of Fatah al-Islam to the Lebanese army, then they would continue to answer to all the fire that comes out from the camp.
I mean, is this something we can give much credence to?
I think what's happened is that they've been able to push Fatah al-Islam into, at least the remaining elements of Fatah al-Islam, into one part of the camp, the center of the camp. So they've encircled them, and they clearly felt that they can declare some kind of victory, but that victory is only in one phase of this operation. So as far as they're concerned, it's phase one. I think what's happening now is that the army's lost 76 soldiers. This has put enormous strain on the military, a military that hasn't been prepared for an operation of this size. So I think what they want to do now is to sit still, encircle them, and hope that with this pressure, the fact that nobody can leave this part of the camp, that they will eventually surrender. And I think they are still putting pretty stiff conditions that everybody has to, all the leaders have to give themselves up.
But the question, I mean, everybody's asking us, is who are these people? I mean, you know, we've looked into our profiles and so on and so forth. I mean, you were in Lebanon just recently, you were telling me, and there's a lot of talk before this broke out about this group. So tell us a bit about them.
Yes, I think the most important thing when I talk about this event, is to look at two things. First, the role of the Lebanese army, before we talk about who these people are, and also the role of these terrorist groups, because Fatah al-Islam is just one of them. And while they have taken definitely a very, very hard beating, there are many others. I was recently talking to an expert who told me there's at least 1,000 of these people in Lebanon, not necessarily under the banner of Fatah al-Islam, but under the others. And I think it's very important here to remember that the Lebanese army is very ill-equipped, very poorly equipped. It is not the biggest army or the best army in the area. So one has to really give credit to the Lebanese army in that respect, and also think of what role the Lebanese army could play later. Yes, indeed, I was in Tripoli. I come from Tripoli, and it's very interesting that people were talking when I was in Tripoli in Lebanon about something happening in Nahr al-Bared. And in Lebanon, you learn, if you lived through the civil war and other wars, that whatever they say, that somehow it becomes true, somebody knows, which is very scary in many ways. So yes, people were talking about the scope, people were talking about some event happening, although it wasn't as clear. Who are these people? I think it's very difficult to know. Of course, there are many rumors. Some people suggest that they are allied to somebody like Saad al-Hariri and group, which I find ridiculous. Other people say that no, these people actually are from Al-Qaeda, or at least carry the Al-Qaeda thought and ideas and aspirations. And we all know that Shia Al-Absi, who was the leader of this group, was imprisoned in Syria and actually was sent across the border from Syria to Lebanon. Nevertheless, I must say that most of the people and experts I've talked to recently said they don't think that Syria has anything to do with Al-Qaeda. If anything, the Syrians are pretty scared of Al-Qaeda spreading into their own country.
I think this is a good point to bring in Judith Palmer-Harrick, who is in Beirut and who's on the line, is listening to us, we hope. You've just been listening, Judith. What's the feeling there in Beirut? I mean, what are the strongest rumours about who this group are? I mean, as we were just saying there has been a lot of talk that the Lebanese government, that people like Saad Hariri have been behind them, that they financed them. Is that what a lot of people there believe, or do they put it down to Damascus? Hello, Judith.
I think I heard the question. I think the question was concerned whether some people here believe that the Lebanese government was somehow behind this group in the north. Is that the question?
Yes. There have been a lot of rumors about that, a lot of talk about that. So, I mean, with Saad Hariri particularly in the frame as providing financial backing.
What I have heard from this end is that while the complex situation occurred right before and during and after the war between Israel and Hezbollah, wherein it was thought by the government here and possibly the Israelis and Americans that Hezbollah would be defeated in that war, and that it would possibly make some sense to arrange a counterbalance among other fundamentalist groups or group for Hezbollah, to take on Hezbollah more or less on the domestic scene. And when Hezbollah prevailed, or let's say at least stood off annihilation by the Israelis, then this group that had been financed from overseas, and word that I've heard has it from the Emirates in a way, supplied with arms and even financed through the Emirate hand, was left sort of swinging in the north and suddenly had to be dispatched by government forces then. It seems that some people here believe that that was a plan that more or less backfired and has now, put the Lebanese army to a great deal of trouble with a lot of deaths and casualties. That's one view that I've heard.
Well, I'd also be like to put to Roula, and there's been a lot of talk that that's what Saad Hariri, the Lebanese government, to some extent was doing as a counterbalance to Hezbollah after, all the gains that they made last summer, that they were encouraging these groups to come in and that they would be a balance against Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Now,
I think there's a very great confusion about what's happening in the Sunni community in Lebanon. And I think proponents of this theory aren't really looking at the way that Fatah al-Islam has developed, and that can be documented. I don't think we need to deal with rumors in this conflict. I think we have done, for instance, our correspondents have gone into the field, have spent a lot of time in Tripoli trying to find out how this group developed. This group was actually set up and formed by another group called Fatah al-Intifada. Fatah al-Intifada is a Palestinian group that was a splinter group from the mainstream Fatah. Fatah al-Intifada is a group that's based in Damascus. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is controlled, that every move that Fatah al-Intifada makes is controlled by the Syrian government or Syrian intelligence. But there is no question from the research that we have done that the way that Fatah al-Islam was formed was through Fatah al-Intifada. There were leaders of Fatah al-Intifada in Damascus who sent Shia al-Absi and other people into various camps in Lebanon. Now, little by little, these people first went to the Bekaa, then they spread out in different, there are 12 Palestinian camps in Lebanon, and then they congregated essentially after being kicked out of other camps. They all found each other in Nahr al-Bared. And in Nahr al-Bared, they took over the positions of Fatah al-Intifada and declared in November 2006 that they are Fatah al-Islam. So I think it's very dangerous to actually only deal with rumors when it comes to something like this. There is no question that the rise of Hezbollah and the radicalization, the polarization that happened in Lebanon gave cause to some Sunni leaders to think about what kind of counterbalance they should create. And I think certainly some Sunni leaders have thought, can we create a counter-militia? If we're going to have a civil war, we need to also have our people armed. And we have seen evidence of some weapons in Lebanon. But I think this is one thing. Fatah al-Islam is a different story, and it's very dangerous to confuse, the Sunni radicalization, the rise of Salafi Islam. Not all Salafis, for instance, and there are a lot of Salafis in Tripoli, not all Salafis are Qaeda-driven or Qaeda-inspired. So I think there's been a huge confusion over, the radicalization of Sunni elements in Lebanon, and it's very important that a distinction is made. It makes, from what we've seen and the research that we've done, it makes absolutely no sense for Saad al-Hariri or for the Future Mover or for the government to finance people who they know were sent by a group in Damascus. They would not trust such a group. They would want to look to a different group that they would form, that they would trust if they are to do such a thing. So that's why, I don't find much evidence of these theories, although they are prevalent in Beirut.
So the finger points at Damascus, mostly, with this group.
Well, I'm sorry I have to answer this, but yes. If you've lived in Lebanon, if you know how the Lebanese, what and who has the finger on the pulse, how much the Syrian intelligence infrastructure has developed over 30 years of occupation, of friendly occupation of Lebanon, you would know. It starts by decapitating leadership or any future leadership, and then it continues to plant its own people, to impose a certain mode of behavior on elected personalities. List of elected members of parliament are distributed even before elections do take place. So again, democracy is not complete in the Middle East, but to some extent Lebanon is one of the most representative countries in the region, and Syrian influence have grown so much in that country that it's difficult to understand that anybody who would buy 10 rocket launchers will not pass through a middleman who has a certain relationship with the Syrian system. And the apparatus goes further, that at some point and some operations there is blessing and counter-blessing. Some Israeli agents definitely also are present in the country, but these people do know each other. And we go back to Nahr al-Bared, even the Lebanese army was not, whose doctrine was re-evaluated and redrawn by Syrian help at School of Chief of Staff in Syria, have changed tremendously, and the army's reorganization was done in a way that serves Syria and that will never cause any problem for Syria, nor be able to control fully the situation in Lebanon. So that was a challenge that the Lebanese army, the Lebanese forces managed to stand up for this threat in Nahr al-Bared and do gather up a certain doctrine and do, from different factions, from different confession, fight together a certain group that was posing threat to the country's stability.
But I think the question, and it's partly what we're talking about on the brink of war again, and what this raises is we've seen all these emergencies happen over the last couple of years again, which have seemed to bring Lebanon back to that brink again and again. With what's been happening in Tripoli, in al-Bared, is that a new element? Because the thing which strikes you most strongly is that, there's talk about Al-Qaeda links and all this kind of thing. Is that the kind of group, first of all, it doesn't have influence beyond the camp, and secondly, is it the kind of group which could bring the kind of indiscriminate death back to Lebanese streets, but we're seeing in Iraq, for example, which could completely change the whole equation in Lebanon at the moment. I mean, we're seeing assassinations, we're seeing killings, but in a sense, they seem to have a point, each one. I mean, you can point a finger, you can say, this is for that reason. What was interesting about this group is it going to bring a different kind of answer kind we've seen in Iraq, which I suppose could bring real civil war to Lebanon?
Yes, I think it's an interesting question. I just want to add something to what Roula said about this group, Fatah al-Islam. They actually were going to declare Tripoli and the area surrounding as an Islamic state. So there is no doubt in our minds that this group at least is affiliated in thought to Al-Qaeda. And it was very interesting as well yesterday we heard the defense minister of Lebanon talk extensively and at length about the threat of these such groups in Lebanon. This is a new added dimension to the problems of Lebanon. And I know that people are talking about perhaps a civil war restarting again, God forbid, in Lebanon. I think one of the good things is that one does not see the elements of a civil war in Lebanon. While you have Hezbollah heavily armed, of course ready to take any faction in Lebanon, you don't see the other factions as ready for such a civil war. You do hear about arms coming to this group or that group. This does not mean that in the far future or the long term that such a war cannot happen. We all know that Israel will be more than happy to pack few ships and send them to Juni to arm this faction or that faction. Nevertheless, I think in the immediate and medium-term future, we are going to see more of this, if you like, low-voltage violence go on. More bombs, perhaps, more I hope not, but perhaps more assassinations, and of course the threat of such groups. And these groups do not exist only in Nahr al-Barid. We have seen what was going to happen in Ain al-Hilwi.
That's the question, is how many groups are there likely to come up like this? The Lebanese government is going to have to face down again.
Yes, I don't know, I'm not a security expert, but from what I understand is that the threat does exist, and these people number in the hundreds, and they are spread all around, not only in the camps. It's unfortunate that we know that some reports talk about them also outside the camps. So, and for the defense minister yesterday to talk about it, I think it's only more of an indication of the threat that these groups definitely pose.
I mean, that's the question that we were looking at there. I mean, this group that appeared, I mean, does it herald a new threat to Lebanon, that other groups will be inspired by this in the Palestinian camps or elsewhere, and will take on the Lebanese government in this small way, not in the way that Hezbollah represents a challenge, but in these small pockets throughout Lebanon, and that they may be prepared to use methods more like what, again, we're seeing in Baghdad and Iraq, and the kind of bombings generally that we've seen in Lebanon the last couple of years have been targeted. I mean, mostly they haven't involved major loss of life. Roula?
I think it's possible. The way that I see Lebanon today, it's a place that's mined, you know, from north to south, and every few months one of these mines blows up. Sometimes it's in the form of an assassination. Sometimes it's in the form of, you know, small bombs here and there targeting, you know, industrial areas, for instance. And sometimes it's much bigger. It's a war, like we had last summer, or what we have today. And I think that is a situation that is likely to continue because there's a very weak state in Lebanon. There's a security apparatus that is extremely weak, that hasn't been able to be restructured since Syrian troops left in 2005. And part of Lebanon is at war with Syria. Another part of Lebanon is at war with the US and with Israel. Part of Lebanon is at war with itself and can't come to terms with the whole concept of Lebanon. So I think Lebanon has been in perpetual crisis and will remain in perpetual crisis for a long time to come. And some people see this as only part of the regional power struggle between the U.S. and Iran, between the Arab world and Iran. But each of these crises also has a local dimension, and the local dimension in Lebanon, a very sectarian country, a very fragile country, a very weak government, does not help to bring about or to protect from the instability that's all around it.
When you look at Lebanon now, you see the same faces in politics that have been there many, many years, who are involved in the civil war. Is there a new generation of Lebanese politicians who can take the reins and who can reject many of the things which have divided the Lebanese before, who can move a country on, who can resist all of these crises, all of these problems, you know, that are there, all the outside influences and so on, and provide some sort of stable future from inside the country, and reject a lot of what's happened in the past. I mean, when you see the people who are talking every time that there's a crisis, as I say, this place we've been seeing for 25, 30 years, and they didn't provide any solution during all that time. Is there a new generation that can do that? Is there any hope in that way?
We go back to the essence of Lebanon and what Lebanon represents. I mean, it's a consociational democracy. It's a democracy, you know, by agreement between people. And it's also still very much feudal. It's very much divided along, you know, religious line as well. 17 sects, you know, interplay and fight for a very small cake. And there is always, you know, a chair missing in the parliament or in government for one representative of this group or that group. Now, you say about new leadership. After 15 years of war, I'm disappointed to say that the same faces and the warlords initially, before the war, we had 99 seats in parliament. All that happened as a result of 250,000 deaths. The parliament was extended to 128 to accommodate those warlords, who more or less did not deviate very much from the way politics was done in Lebanon from the 70s or the 60s. Of course, there was a new version depending on the regional perspective and what was, you know, the problem of the period. Now, currently, post-Taif agreement and the extension of this, the expansion of this parliament, a new leadership, I think the new and willing to change are quickly disillusioned. They pick up a job in Switzerland or in London. Those who are left are less fortunate, maybe less lucky. They ally themselves to local dynamics that happen, be it under Syrian influence, their tribal leader, their religious chief of the sect, more or less to provide them with a job and a certain small future. I know I'm also, you know, like putting a bleak picture here about the future of Lebanon and the chances. Yet, I mean, I think I stopped very much next to the assassination of a young minister, Pierre Al-Jumayel, last November. He was a leader. I mean, his family also was in politics since 1930s and before in Lebanon. But again, you talk to that person, you discuss with him, he's what you call a future leadership that could have become something later. Dead, he's good for nobody, but again, it shows that the cycle of death does not target those who might not serve Lebanon and a certain Lebanese idea, if there is one yet, if the Lebanese one day want to agree on it, and entangle Lebanon out of the regional context and provide a certain new idea. I think Lebanon still needs to form its identity, its legitimacy, and find a certain way. Why does Lebanon needs to exist, i.e. pull the Arab Sunnis from their Sunni environment, reassure the Christian that they have a future in that country, and so forth and so on. You know, like still Lebanon as an idea, as a state, believed in by the people is very precarious, very fragile.
I mean, is the way that we present what's going on there too black and white? I mean, we talk about the government and the opposition, pro-Damascus, anti-Damascus. You've just described obviously a very complex situation. There's 18 sects there. You know, there's all these different kind of hierarchies that haven't changed very much. Is that doing a disservice to understanding the country when we talk about a bloc which is pro-Damascus and a bloc which is anti-Damascus, and we're actually giving an illusory idea of how things actually work there, Baria?
Yes, I think this is very accurate what you're saying. It's very interesting. When I was in Lebanon last, and I haven't been able to spend 3 weeks in a row since many years. It was just divine to be able to stay 3 weeks. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed it. It's like finding a lost love somewhere. I just loved it. there is a huge majority that does not belong to this camp or that camp. Yes, absolutely. And these people are sick and tired of these politicians you're talking about. Many people don't agree with all the old clans of politics. They do not like the way they talk. They do not like the way they operate. You have...
do they have any way to express themselves politically?
No, exactly, no. They don't, because they don't own TV stations, they don't own radios, they don't own newspapers, and whatever access they have to such media is very limited. I mean, there are programs, I understand, that these youngsters can express. And it's not only the youngsters. I'm not talking about a group of people who are between 18 and 25. And I'm basically talking about people who are between perhaps 18 and 35, 40. So a great majority. And something very, very sad was happening is that the group that were leaving Lebanon now were different than the people that even left before. You have the lawyers, you have the engineers, you have the doctors. Many doctors were leaving and setting up a base in the Gulf. Many were trying to come to Europe, of course, to the States. So the country is I think, witnessing something even more dangerous than the explosions and the assassinations. And this is, I think, will show later in the future of Lebanon. Unless we can give these people some hope, I think, mind you, the Lebanese, again, I don't want to sound too pessimistic, are in love with their country, and I know and I hope that many of them will come back. But yet it's different, especially difficult for the young families when they're established somewhere to go back. It's a very complex situation, and I think we should also here talk about the regional aspect of all this conflict.
I mean, what a lot of people say when you're there is that in the last 2 years, everything politically has been frozen. Nothing has moved. Nothing has changed. Now, we haven't talked about Hezbollah yet. Yes, I mean, I was wanting to do Judith, obviously, because that's her field, but we're not getting a chance to do that. Where does Hezbollah stand now after last summer? I mean, after last summer, you know, when the war first started, there was a kind of a reaction against them because they set it off, but then as time went by, there was, you know, a huge backing pretty much across the sects in Lebanon and across the region as well. Hezbollah now, almost a year on from there, where does it stand, Roula, in political terms? What's its next move? What's its plan? What is it planning, do you think?
I think Hezbollah made clear what its next move is soon after the war ended. It turned its attention to the domestic front and to the domestic political front. And since last autumn, Hezbollah's strategy has been to try to get a bigger share of government so that it can have more power in what happens more broadly to Lebanon, whether it's in Lebanon's relations with the outside world or particularly with the region. So Hezbollah moved very quickly, and in my opinion, it rushed into a sort of domestic agenda that may have not been very, very clearly thought out. As you probably know,
you think that blunted its gains that it made in terms of reputation?
I think what happened is by demanding a bigger share of government, and particularly Hezbollah is now the leader of the Lebanese opposition, and what the opposition has been trying to obtain is a third of government seats, which would give it essentially veto power over government decisions. It's a form of protection because Hezbollah felt that this government is too pro-American, that the intention of this government is to move against it. So as a form of protection, it wanted a much bigger say in government decisions. But the way it went about it, by taking over the downtown Beirut, essentially paralyzing economic activity in the country.
You go to Beirut, it's
yes,
still
absolutely.
a tent city in the center.
And I think by confronting a government that was Sunni-led, that's threatened Hezbollah's image in the region as well. I think there was at one point, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah realized that public opinion in the Arab world could turn against Hezbollah if Hezbollah were to be engaged in in an internal Lebanese and an internal Arab battle. And I think what you see happening with Hezbollah is they move, they push, and then they step back, and then they push again, and then they step back. It's a very delicate balance that they have to strike in domestic politics.
I mean, and the question which often one thinks about with Hezbollah is how unified, how disciplined are they within the organization? I mean, you mentioned about the foreign influences. Obviously, you talk about Hezbollah, you think about Iran, you think about Damascus. Now, are there different groups within Hezbollah, some which feel the pull of Iran, some which feel more the pull of Damascus, some which kind of reject that and see the domestic issues in Lebanon as vital? Is that something which matters in terms of how Hezbollah is evolving and the effect that it's going to have within Lebanon?
It's funny, you're always addressing me when it is, to talk about the very technical, pointing finger kind of job. I have a family in Lebanon, I warn you, But, you asked me about, the implication of Hezbollah Islam and then direct link with Syria. I said it. Now, you tell me about the division within Hezbollah. Well, I'll tell you clearly, there is a myth about, especially in Western media, in the media in general and other circles, that there are forces that pull left or pull right, pull pro-Syria or pro-Iran, pro-Lebanon factions within Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a neatly structured organization, speaks with one voice, they play roles, and they do run a very effective information and misinformation campaigns that are basically maybe as good as old Eastern European propaganda machines, enhanced by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards.
But you're saying there aren't any internal divisions over...
What I will say, my feeling is about Hassan Nasrallah, he would feel bad that he, or some part of me would want to think that he is pushed into the foray of things in Lebanon and on the domestic agenda of Lebanon that he would have wished not to. But I think events, and as they basically evolved since the July war, have not allowed him any chance to act in any different ways. And that's if I want to think about the committed, resistance movement that was initiated before it was adopted by any foreign forces in Lebanon. And if there is anything left of the national feeling of these youngsters who followed that movement, it is this certain bitterness that you witness on Nasrallah's face sometime, that he's not convinced. Now, to what extent can you give that credit? I don't know, and I'm not going to go into this one, but I believe that they speak in one voice, that they had a strategic step that they had to make, and they had to get involved on the domestic scene, and they do represent now the opposition movement of Lebanon, basically, rightly or wrongly, to get a bigger share of the cake.
The question, again, I think that people will ask themselves about Hezbollah, who maybe are not into all the intricacies about it, and particularly in America and so on, is what is the ultimate goal? I mean, for what I'm aware of, they're very clever, obviously, at not making that too explicit, because it's not in their interests. But, I mean, can one gauge, I mean, in its most black and white terms, you're talking like, Hamas, is it an Islamist state they're after in Lebanon? Or is it something much more in tune with the Lebanese people that they're willing to go for, Beria?
Yes, I just want to add something to what Roula and Howard were saying. During my stay in Lebanon, I was very lucky because I was able to talk to somebody who was very, very close to Hezbollah, and I was able to pose some questions, and it was very interesting because he was stressing all the time that Hezbollah does not want to mingle with internal politics, that Hezbollah actually has to concentrate, needs to concentrate on its struggle with Israel, because Israel is this formidable foe that they don't have time, and they are doing so badly actually in internal politics. So I just thought I should maybe mention that.
It's a push and pull within the organization,
yes,
surely.
And yes, exactly. And also talking about whether Hezbollah speaks with one voice or not, I think they are playing a fantastic media game. Their Manar is just amazing.
It's
and
just a TV station.
Yes. And also they have newspapers that are friends. They're doing a very, very good job there. are they all having the same feeling? No. Again, while I was in Lebanon, one of the questions I posed, if Israel or the Americans hit Iran, would Hezbollah indeed go and hit Israel to ally itself with Iran? One person told me, are you serious? But of course not. We're Lebanese. We will not do something so stupid. And the other answer was, of course, yes. What do you mean? You mean we will let Iran be hit and we'll stand and just watch them be destroyed? So there you are. I'm sure they do have different points of view, which is, I think, democratic as well. It's only normal. But yet you do not see this in public. You definitely don't see this in public. Now, I think Hezbollah would be very, very happy at this point, specifically at this point, because of what's happening and because of the thought that Israel might indeed find reasons. And I had a briefing last week, which was published in Al-Hayat, I must say, 2 days ago, and in it he stressed that there could be a hit by Israel on Lebanon this summer. And I said, why? You have UNIFIL there. How can they hit the south? He said, no, that's going to be a completely different scenario. What we are going to see is there will be some sort of a mistake, like the Katyusha rockets that we saw, and Israel will not actually hit the south because, of course, they will not hit UNIFIL, but they will actually hit on the rockets wherever they are found, and perhaps they will hit the suburbs of Beirut. So I think Hezbollah, and I don't hear them the last 2-3 weeks. We haven't really seen Sheikh Hassan, which is literally bizarre because, I mean, with all what's happening, I think they are busy, and I hope and I pray that they will, because they're very well respected as long as they are sticking to fighting Israel and not fighting their fellow Lebanese.
But, I mean, there was talk immediately after the summer war last year that this was round one and that there'd be other rounds to come. But the feeling was that it's not going to come that fast for either side. What Barrier is suggesting is that it might be coming sooner than perhaps we'd expected. I mean, Roula, do you have any sources or any information which kind of gives you a sense that there could be? I mean, from my point of view, it doesn't really seem to be anybody's interest, but...
No, I mean, clearly not a repeat of last summer. I mean, at least not intentionally. I don't see what... I mean, Hezbollah wouldn't get much out of it, and certainly Israel wouldn't, given the beating that they got last year. But if we could just return for a second to Hezbollah, I think Hezbollah is a very complex organization, and I'm sure that there's a lot of debate inside. There were questions last year, for instance, as to whether even the kidnapping of the soldiers had been planned, had come about as an opportunistic move on their part, or whether even there were questions whether Nasrallah himself knew about it, or whether it might have been someone who possibly been influenced by other forces. But my reading of Hezbollah has always been that Hezbollah is a national movement. It's a national movement that has very strong strategic ties to both Iran and Syria, but much more to Iran than to Syria, both spiritually, religiously, and politically. And Hezbollah does take into account the interests of its allies when it decides on an operation. I don't think that Hezbollah is an organization that gets a phone call from Iran that says, bomb, and it goes ahead. It has to balance the interest of its allies against its own interest. And I think this year, this balancing act has become much more difficult because the interests of Iran in particular in Lebanon have become much greater. The interests of the U.S. in Lebanon have become much greater. So Lebanon become much more of a battlefield, of a battleground for the wider forces. And that has put Hezbollah under a lot more pressure. And that's why sometimes we see contradictions in the way that it acts. We see contradictions we see very emotional outbursts sometimes, and then much calmer declarations. And I think this reflects the fact that Hezbollah is torn between its domestic interest and its wider regional interest.
Again, we're talking about outside influences, and I mean, when you look at the history of Lebanon, it's seen as a theatre for wars being fought by proxy, by, by other countries, and you're talking about the increased interest by the Iranians, by the US in Lebanon. I mean, is that the kind of match that's needed to set, after all the crises and menaces we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years in Lebanon, is that what would need to actually tip it over into a situation where we would have a wider kind of conflict going on within Lebanon again? Does it need that? I mean, if it was left to the Lebanese themselves, what's going on at the moment with an assassination here, an assassination there, a showdown there, the problem with Hezbollah and so on, would that be enough to push it over the edge, or does it need those outside players again, and are they coming back and strong enough into Lebanon that it could do that?
Well, I mean, take any small fight, it depends how many players come into it. The ingredients of a civil war, you need somebody to underwrite the civil war. You need money. Look at the price of oil. There is a lot of money in the region. Look at the actors willing to pick a fight regionally or internally. There are many of them. I'd hate to be pessimistic, but all the ingredients are there. Now, traditionally, Lebanon, the farmers fought among each other since the inception of Mount Lebanon before it became a republic. We've seen many massacres, developing, many small farmers fight developing into massacres in the 1840s, 1860s. Before that, nobody underwrote the fight, but later there were interests, French, British, Ottoman, and so on. Later, Arab, nationalist, Islamist, Syrian, Iranian, American, French, call it what you like. So today, would the Lebanese, I mean, the memory of the Lebanese, it's still vivid. They've seen the civil war and the hardship of the civil war that took place. Are they willing to go down that road again? The ingredients are there. Are the Lebanese willing to go down that road? This is a big question. And my initial, feeling is that they will make the same mistake again.
Well, we've moved on to that. Before we throw open to questions, I mean, maybe you could each answer that. I mean, this is what it is it on the brink of a civil war?
I really think that there is already a political civil war in Lebanon. It's been going on for quite a while. But again, I reiterate, I do not see a military struggle between the Lebanese themselves. I do not see a civil war like the one we've seen before. I don't see the ingredients, and I don't think even that the region powers, I don't see that the area with what's going on in Iraq, with what's going on in Palestine, I don't think that the Arab mind and soul and I can take another civil war in the area. I see Lebanon as part of this, I hate to sound like Condoleezza Rice, God forgive me, this war between moderates and fundamentalists and militants being played across the area. Yes, I see that, but I do not see that there's going to be militaries again, between Ain Rumani and West and East Beirut, and I'm only hoping that the Lebanese have grown up, that they have again learned enough. But again, I want to say something which we have not touched upon. Israel remains and is the biggest enemy of Lebanon. Let us not make a mistake at all about this. Israel has a stake in a civil war in Lebanon, in wars in Lebanon, in civil unrest in Lebanon. So again, it's not because lack of weapons or whatever. And of course there are elements on both sides that maybe would like a civil war. But I think, and I know for a fact, that Hezbollah would not wish for a civil war. And I think Nasrallah has stated this, and I believe him, because it will be against every interest he has. And I think also it will be against the interest of the Syrians currently. I'll tell you why. Because the Syrians' constituency is more than 90% Sunnis. And for the Syrians to be seen in a context of a civil war, allied with the Shias against the Sunnis, this is going to create problems for them.
But things do happen against what people's interests appear to be, don't
I'm
they?
only
Roula?
hoping.
Yeah, I'm reminded by something that Lakhdar Brahimi said when he was an envoy to Iraq in 2003, I think. He said countries don't wake up one day and decide to have a civil war. They slowly slide into it. And I think, unfortunately, Lebanon is sliding. It's going in that direction. But there is something quite powerful that also mitigates against it. And that is that all communities in Lebanon stand to lose. And they stand to lose enormously. Hezbollah stands to lose if it's fighting Sunnis. The Sunnis don't have the power to fight Hezbollah. At the end of the day, the Christians will be fighting each other and will undermine each other and will weaken the whole Christian community. So I think that is one element, and I think it's a pretty strong element.
That everyone has a stake in.
That everyone has a stake in keeping it short of civil war.
But are we seeing, rather than a civil war, are we seeing just another one of Lebanon's small wars, which has been like a continuous process going on? And the civil war, big one, ended, but it was never healed, it was never solved. And this is another part of what's been going on, as you've been saying, going way back before the civil war happened. Anyway, let's throw it open to questions. And you first, you'd like to wait for the...
Hi, thank you. I'm doing my master's at King's. I'm from Tripoli also. I lived in Beirut and still live in Beirut, technically. I recently came back from Lebanon about 2 weeks ago, and I did an interview with a professor at AUB who actually... Danny Adlam, sorry. I did an interview with a professor at AUB, you all might know him actually, who has also written about the history and the politics. And I asked him about Lebanon and its sectarian conflict and narrative, since I'm doing it, doing comparative literature and politics as narrative. And he was arguing that, along the lines of Kenny Sadibi, that Lebanon is very much constructed on feudalism and so on and so forth. But like a lot of Lebanon's history, it's Orientalized. But the very perception of its history is constructed along Orientalized and unfortunately influenced by certain powers, interests, French colonial period, moving onwards. And that a lot of what we perceive our history as now is constructed off of these narratives, off of these, Orientalized perceptions of the war from back then. I think my question is with regards to the sectarian conflict, in which is inherent in the problems and is also influencing this. Can there be a way in which we can, discuss these narratives and the influence of these narratives in a way that with regards to the peoples on the grounds and kind of reshaping the dynamic? Is there not a means in which to do that? Is there not a space for that? I mean, specifically amongst the youth in Lebanon, I'm finding a large minority of people demanding a different story, a different discourse, a different kind of, polar. The problem is the political elite and what they're interested, what they're saying, and how they're orientalizing these historical narratives.
Are you saying that the Lebanese are ripe for a narrative of their story that they can share more, rather than all these different ones with these different groups and different sects, have their own interpretation? If they could come up with one which involved everybody, then they might be able to, be a unified country.
I don't know if it's about unifying a narrative, more than understanding what the prominent narrative, what the consistent narratives are, and what the implications of them are, and how they work with regards to...
Okay, so, out of narratives, obviously there must be an awful lot of narratives in Lebanon about what's been happening. Does that have an influence on how people behave, that they see things for such different reasons? We're at the situation now because that happened. No, we're at the situation because that happened. And because they don't agree about the cause, they can't agree about the solution.
Certainly, I mean it's normal that this should happen. But I think perhaps what you're trying to portray is whether you always have to fall into a sectarian narrative at the end of the day. And I think, unfortunately, in Lebanon, you inevitably do. It's not because the political conflicts themselves are sectarian. They're not. They're political conflicts. Part of the political problem today is also social. It is about when you see Hezbollah supporters in downtown Beirut, one of the things they tell you is that we're very happy to be here because we never get the chance. We don't have enough money. to spend time in downtown. So there are other narratives. The problem in Lebanon is that politics are defined along sectarian lines, and you inevitably fall into the sectarian narrative, however hard you try. I think Hariri's project was, at the beginning, a non-sectarian project. It was a unifying project around an economic rather than political idea. But soon, and rather quickly, he fell into the sectarian narrative, and he became a Sunni leader. And I think since then, his son has become much more of a Sunni leader because he's been confronted with the power of Hezbollah, and his only answer to confronting Hezbollah is to latch on to the Sunni identity.
Just wondering whether it is just about the political side of things. I mean, when you're talking about, Hezbollah in downtown, and I was there a month or so ago, and obviously we've all been there, and when you're passing by with somebody who doesn't belong to them, I mean, I wouldn't use the words that they would use to describe the people who are there. So there's no sense of a shared goal or a shared narrative about what Lebanon is or where we're going or what Hezbollah achieved or didn't achieve last year, which goes far beyond the political level. That's at a personal, individual level, how people react to things. If they don't feel they share the same goals, they don't share the same culture, they don't share the same space, any of that.
I don't know, it's very difficult to say. I mean, I want to say, what narrative would you like to change? Find me a narrative that could bound the Lebanese. The idea of Lebanon, yes, virtually we all subscribe to it, but practically nobody cares. And until something, or not care enough, until something changes, that remains. Confessionalism is a very important point. They tried to eradicate it through the Taif agreement. It hasn't gone anywhere because there were still more or less Syrian supervision to the, or so-called, supervision to the development and the institution of the Taif agreement, and it didn't happen.
I think what is very, very sad is while the world is becoming global and while people are actually getting away from religion, in our area people are going back to religion in such a bad way. The Muslims are becoming more Muslims, the Christians are becoming more Christians, people are becoming more entrenched, everybody is scared and running to a corner and feeling that it's only God and religion that's going to protect them and that's going to make them what they are. This is a trend that is going around the area. And if there is anywhere in the Middle East that could have and should have escaped this, would have been Lebanon, because of its makeup, of its very, the groups that are there, the different Christians, Muslims, etc. But of course, guess what? The Lebanese fell to the game of the region. They are being used by every faction around the world, be it Iran or Syria or Israel or the United States of America. The day that the Lebanese will learn not to do that, then there will be a Lebanon which is united. Leave the Lebanese alone and they will do marvels. It's just that they fall victim every time.
Very interesting.
You can have it straight after.
I think I need to cheer up a little bit. There are a couple of factors that I think you're underweighing in the analysis.
Can you have your name, please?
One of them is that there is a consensus in Lebanon for the first time in 25 years. If you exclude for a second Hezbollah, we have found something that's unique and new, which is a consensus on the national identity. Independent foreign policy, independent government, with its flaws. There is a significant qualitative difference in the people governing us from before. They're not warlords for the most part. Some of them are bureaucrats and relatively, I would say, clean from a reputational and other perspectives. The second thing that I think you're underweighing a little bit in analysis is the impact on the army of the latest battles on the country as a whole. We discovered that we have an army with no ammunition, nothing, but at least was united, and the death toll from all the communities. I think if anything, those two factors, Hezbollah for whatever strategic reasons have chosen for the time being to be outside the consensus. But sooner or later, whether it has a significant advance and will be pulled back into the consensus. The analysis is right, but it is not the same dynamics as it used to be, at least in my view, during the war. And I think it would be to host facts
I think I did mention the army at the very beginning, and I did mention the role of the army, and I thought it was great, even though they had hardly any arms and any training, and they're the poorest army in the area, probably in the world, but yet they were able to do a fantastic job. I do agree with you about the consensus of a large majority, but however, we need not to forget that Hezbollah is Lebanese. These are Lebanese people, and we do need to bring them into the fold. It will not work if we alienate or we think that, we have this large group and we live all and go and swim in St. George and congregate in Ashrafi and wherever we are, and then these people exist in Dahi and we don't need to worry about them. They're very much part of Lebanon, and we need to worry about them, and we need to bring them into the consensus that you're talking about.
Well,
but thank you.
Do you think there is such a consensus?
I think that Lebanon is split down the middle. I mean, every opinion poll shows that Lebanon is split down the middle. You can't put Hezbollah aside. First of all, Hezbollah is not alone. And if anything, Hezbollah is about the most powerful political force in Lebanon today. So I don't think we can start any discussion by saying putting Hezbollah aside. There is no such thing as putting Hezbollah aside, particularly that Hezbollah has now taken. It leads a much bigger group than Hezbollah. Whether by you might say, if Hezbollah wasn't around, then maybe this group wouldn't be led by them. But Hezbollah is there, so I think Lebanon is split right down the middle. And if we had an election today, it's anyone's guess whether March 14 forces or the opposition would win, and it's entirely possible that the opposition would win. So, as to the army, I think that was what happened in Nahr al-Bared did show that there was a lot of unity behind the army. But let's not forget, the army is about the only national institution left. And I think one reason why the army has had so many, this has not been, what we see, what you read, is a very simple story of Nahr al-Bared. We don't know what's going on within the army, and I'm sure that there are a lot of tensions within the army, and that may very well be one reason why they decided to declare victory when it's not really yet, at least, a victory.
Name me one opportunity since the independence and since the Palestinians came to Lebanon.
We had a great opportunity. We are in the very people on the streets. 6 months later, the Christians were divided.
Yes.
Shia polarized their opinions.
Yes.
We're back to the same story. So I don't believe blaming Israel and Syria always is the right thing. We are incapable of running our own business.
Well, I see where you're coming from, and I please do not underestimate what Israel or Syria can do to the Lebanese. But the point, but the point is, a large majority of the Lebanese were allied to Syria and are still allied to Syria and Iran. And I'm not saying that the others, some of them don't have also other alignments. Also the other group, some of them do. So we have not really been able to give them the chance. Don't forget how much we suffered since, courtesy to Israel, we have about 500,000 Palestinians living in Lebanon with all what brought in the civil war, if you remember. Yeah, so...
I'd like to ask Mohammed that question, actually.
I have to just to beg to differ with Bari'a, my colleague, and agree with you. And I think the bottom line that you're trying to say is that unless the Lebanese are more or less accepting to be client to a foreign or a strange or external force, nothing would happen in Lebanon to split the Lebanese. And I think we go back to the history of Lebanon, unfortunately. It's a client-patron relationship all along. And I think until the Lebanese shake off this attitude, then they will continue to be client or be, tradesmen by nature, i.e. they will develop a certain trade deal with this side or that side, and then he will get ahead. So there is a strong competitive sense.
So the outside influences blows up the problems that are already in Lebanon, endemic to Lebanon.
I think what Mr. Hayek is saying here...
They blow them up, but it doesn't mean that if the outside influences weren't there, the Lebanese wouldn't have problems. And I agree also. I think there is an issue of the national project in Lebanon. There's an issue of unity. There's an issue of opportunism. And I think perhaps one of the great examples is that after Hariri's death, how March 14 split, because that was a really defining moment which weakened the March 14 forces, and had Michel Aoun not split off from the rest of March 14, we would not be where we are today.
One aspect we haven't touched upon tonight is economic and social. Economically, the country has started living those who have and those who don't have.
Yes,
And
true.
the economic split in the Christian community today, in my opinion, is those who have and those who don't have. So it's not Syria, it's not Israel, it's not the US. We cannot manage our own business. We have failed on many opportunities since 1943 till today. We keep blaming other people, but truly, we're not good at running a country or work as a team. We're individualistic.
Okay. Take another question. People asking back by the guy with glasses. Back there. Get you.
Actually, I would argue that there has been a subtle shift in Lebanese politics in the last few years. It's no longer just feudal politics or feudal lord. You can still see that. You can see the Jaja, and you can see Nabil Berri, and you can see all the feudal politics. But also you see two emerging new forces, which I think is quite important. One of them is the Hezbollah movement. It's not a feudal movement. It's a political movement that represents a community that wants to emerge and play the Shia community. But the difference is, rather than being a Shia community enclosed on itself, which is the previous Shia political leaders tried to pursue, it's a Shia community that tries to be part of the politics of Lebanon and plays a role in it. But also it's a phenomenon that you have to understand, but it's very strong. It's a group itself that can challenge the side, and that give tremendous strength. The other movement in Lebanon is the Aoun people, the Christians, the middle class Christians and so on, who also wants to get out of being just an enclosed community of Christians, but to play a big role in the politics of Lebanon. And I think these two movements, despite any misgivings you had about Aoun, I'm not worried about Aoun himself, but about the movement he represents, it represents two communities in Lebanon who are trying to play a role in Lebanon, not as a feudal entities, but as communities trying to be part of the movement. So there is one big shift in power in Lebanon, which is gradually asserting itself, and I don't know where it will end up. But also we should not forget also the geopolitics. The geopolitics is the U.S. trying to say that, look, Lebanon is known, but actually the U.S. doesn't have the strength to impose its will. On the other hand, you have Syria, and Lebanon cannot, there's Syria along the whole borders, and Syria is going to impose, it will always going to have a big influence on Lebanon politics. Maybe Iran playing a role in there. So the question is, where would this geopolitical struggle and the national struggle end up? And I can see myself, there is actually going to be an end game with an air in Lebanon. I can really see it, and hopefully that will not be on the expense of a civil war, because civil war, and that's why Hezbollah and everybody is trying to avoid it. But I think we are going to see a big shift in power in Lebanon over the next, simply because the U.S. cannot impose its own political will in Lebanon, and the government in charge now has neither the military will or the military power, which is very significant, and that has weakened tremendously after Nahr al-Barid, because that means, for various reasons, they really lost a lot of their military power, but also they have some popular mandate, and as you said, Roula said, it's 50-50, probably 50-50, 40-60, doesn't matter, but actually I see a very big shift in politics within Lebanon where that was...
We'll take that as a question in a moment, but I'd like to give some more people a chance to speak as well. You've been holding up your hand for a while. If you, can you, in a moment we'll get it, can you, thanks.
My name is and I've just published a book on Lebanon and got back a week ago. A question in the spirit of the discussion that's been rolling for a while now. Mary, you were talking about the silent majority in Lebanon. when I was there last, I found a huge number of young people that fell into this group that sponsored either March the 14th or March the 8th. And we're trying to do a lot about this in terms of developing these new civil society organisations. So, source for optimism perhaps. On the other hand, when I started looking into that, I found that these groups seem to be stymied, not just by the current situation, but by the fact that by ingrained sectarian thinking among Lebanese people, and by the fact that the older generation, which they really need to get on side if they're to have any influence, seem to be utterly disaffected and feel unable to do anything. So I wonder what you and anyone else on the panel thought about that movement, whether there's any mileage in that for doing things differently in Lebanon for the future. Second, more specific question to Roula. You were talking about the view that Fatah and Islam have had support from the government. Now, when I was there, I came across this view as well, and I think, as you were suggesting, I thought that I attributed that to sort of popular rumour that arose quite naturally out of the sectarian and the March the 8th position into which that those people fell. But I was very intrigued by what you said, that you had some evidence that there had been some thinking from some leaders about creating a counterbalance. And I wonder if you can say a bit more about who those leaders are and what that thinking is and how far it's got in terms of actually doing anything.
Okay, before we'll take one more question just to give people a chance. At the back, yeah. Sorry to make you go all the way.
It seems that there's a thin line between what is a global jihadi movement and what is a sort of a Syrian manipulated Islamist group in Lebanon or in Iraq as well. We were hearing from the American officials the accusations about jihadis passing through Syrian airports, through the Syrian borders as well. I mean, to what extent has Syria succeeded in manipulating those jihadi groups to serve its own purposes? That's my first question. Second is, it seems to me very unclear to what extent has the Bush administration in Lebanon, what sort of influence does it have on Hariri's government or Senura's government? Does it manipulate its own decisions? Does it have a certain sway? I mean, it seems to me as if the Hariri camp, the 14th of March camp, has slided into a strong alliance with the American policymakers in the Middle East. Thank you.
Okay, we'll look at those questions. The first question was Hezbollah and their own camp. I mean, I sort of understood that as being, can they be genuinely inclusive? Can they go beyond their own constituency to actually include people outside?
I think on the surface, you're right. But if one looks closely at Hezbollah, Hezbollah is actually extremely sectarian. As a project, Hezbollah is outside the feudal system. It's a new party. It's an actual party, much more than the other movements in Lebanon. But Hezbollah is sectarian. Who is in Hezbollah except people from the Shia community? Has anyone been able to fight, to take part in Hezbollah's resistance? Hezbollah is called the Lebanese resistance, but it's not really the Lebanese resistance. It is the Hezbollah resistance. It represents, at least up to 2000, it was representing Lebanese national interest. But I think it too, just like Hariri himself, fell into the sectarian game in Lebanon. So I don't think that is a new project that anyone can emulate. And I think similarly with Aoun. Aoun is a warlord as much as the others. I mean, let's not forget his background. So I don't see much of a difference.
Silent majority we're talking about as well there. Is there a silent majority in Lebanon which is a cause for hope, a cause for optimism, that they dissociate themselves from all the tried and tested and failed attitudes that have existed? They don't see themselves represented by the government. I mean, are they a force that can actually do something on the national stage politically, or are they just going to bleed out of the country and leave, as we've been seeing in the last couple of years, Mohammed?
Well, I think silent majority will always be silent. They are busy trying to find bread to feed their children.
But we're talking about a possible slide to civil war. Can they stay silent while that slide's going on?
Well, what could they do? Their voices are the lowest. They are the silent majority. They don't have propaganda means. They disagree with the leadership. They are more or less, on the fringe of everything that is happening politically. They don't have a force to manipulate or mobilize the street. They have, I think, the Lebanese silent majority may be mobilized after the death of Hariri, or again, section of it, maybe not all of it. And they went and they said no to assassination, no to imposing, the will of others on the country, and a certain feeling of national cohesion sprang out from, in the immediately after.
But has it lasted?
It has lasted, but then people go back to their work, go back to trying to fight and find a certain bread to feed their children. And it is tough in Lebanon economically and so on. And unless they mobilize into certain, more or less certain groups that could become the umbrella, and I agree with the gentleman, maybe I put the emphasis on the feudal. I didn't talk about the divine and the religious, okay, Lebanon is a sectarian country, and Hezbollah is one faction that is sectarian among all, and not all the people do subscribe to that. But as Bari'a said earlier as well, if the silent majority, more or less, they will act on the spur of the moment, and afterward, unless they are organized, and then what you will have as a result of that is Hezbollah leading a certain herd, Aoun leading another herd, and other groups leading other herds. Sorry, I don't mean to belittle the value of these groupings, but as a result, but the silent majority, is it truly, do they subscribe by the word and the letter to everything that is Hezbollah is doing, or everything that is the Socialist Party in the mountain doing, or Aoun and his aim to become president or to lead the majority of the Christian is doing? No, I think they just wanted to streamline or forward their thoughts, not to remain silent, but as a result, the track of,
But isn't there a question which kind of goes beyond that? If Lebanon were to slide into a genuine kind of all-out conflict, that silent majority, that majority of people would be involved in the war and would end up fighting as happened in 1975.
How many participated in that war?
Well, that's true. But more, than just lined up at the moment, are drawn into it. That's one of the questions you have to ask yourself, that the Lebanese people now, the generation of Lebanese now who were born, after the war, don't remember the war, have they got any sense that they could suddenly, their mind throwing could turn to accept that as a reality? Or is that what's keeping Lebanon from really descending to war, that the people just, it just doesn't seem a possibility to them and they can't be drawn into it as happened before?
I tell you what I've noticed. I've noticed that there is really no appetite for a civil war in Lebanon amongst not only the people but also the politicians and the leaders. But I'll tell you about the silent majority. What is also extremely sad, and this is not only in Lebanon, and I've traveled extensively lately in the area, is that now people listen to the name many times to see whether you are Sunni or Shia. People again in Lebanon talk about, I will spend the evening in Ashrafiyeh, I will not go to West Beirut. We're hearing, things that we forgot all about. We wanted to forget, and we did manage to forget about them. Now all of a sudden we are hearing them, and this is not something that only is in Lebanon. It's very much in Bahrain, it's very much in Kuwait, it's very much in different countries around the area. This is very, very sad. This Sunni Shia, suddenly everybody is talking about it, everybody is aware of it. It's very scary, extremely scary. Sorry.
Okay, we haven't answered all the questions, and not yours, Mohammed, but we might get onto that. I'd like to give a chance to some other people if they have questions they want to ask or they want to say something. Yep.
Hypothetical situation. What would happen if the government were to give 1/3 of the seats to Hezbollah? How would it work? What are the potential consequences and fears against doing that? politically and financially.
Another question?
And the integration of the army with Hezbollah as well.
Hi, Suraya Salam. I just want to go back to the Fatah al-Islam narrative we were talking about at the beginning, and the shift from Fatah al-Fatah and Fatah al-Islam. The way I see it is there was a lot of going back and forth with the sides of Arabs, other individuals between Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, maybe back between the three countries. Can someone just elaborate, this is a very technical question, but on the role of the Syrian intelligence with all these ins and outs, and to what extent the effect of the Syrian removing themselves, leaving eventually, how that plays a role into maybe noticing much more of these rambling or the splinters?
Let's go back to the question that Mohammed was asking before, which was what sort of influence does the Bush administration have over the government in Lebanon? There's a lot of talk about this, obviously, from inside Lebanon, outside Lebanon. Roula, if you'd like to give us insight into that.
Do you want to say, I think just as Hezbollah doesn't take orders from Iran, Fuad Samir does not take orders from Kandi Rice. Clearly, there are shared interests between the Bush administration and the Sinara government. And in many ways, the Sinara government is far more important to the Bush administration than the other way around, because Fuad Samir essentially has to pay for the fact that he's friends with the Americans, and the only thing that's worse than being an enemy of the Americans today is being their friend. So. It's the same relationship that a lot of Middle Eastern countries have with the Bush administration. There are issues that are shared, and there are consultations that take place. But I don't subscribe to these popular beliefs in Lebanon that this government is a proxy of the Bush administration and the Bush administration's designs in Lebanon. This was an elected government. There were free elections in Lebanon, and I think people tend to forget that in the big, when we're talking about conspiracies in the region.
Yes, I just want to tell you something. I was with a very important huge European leader, and I said, we Arabs have this conspiracy theory all the time. Why are you helping us? Why are the Americans helping us? What do you want from us? And he smiled and he said, look, I'll tell you the story. Every politician that goes to Lebanon falls in love with Lebanon. Also, there is this emotional attachment to Lebanon. Also, it's our interest, of course. We have great interest in Lebanon. Of course, politics is not a very emotional thing. But the fact is that I agree with Roula. It's much worse to be friends with America these days and to be seen friends with America than to be the enemy. Immediately you are labeled as an agent and whatever labels you have there. I really sincerely believe, and I attended a conference of donors for Lebanon in Sweden. It was unbelievable because they were hoping to get $500,000. They got $1 billion simply because countries were so generous. Everybody just came up with donations that some of them were not even planned. The idea of Lebanon, I think, especially in that area where militancy and fundamentalism is rising by the minute, I think the idea of Lebanon is very much needed.
We have these technical questions. Mohammed, you drawn a short straw here. What would happen? Would it be cataclysmic? Would it be a huge thing if Hezbollah were given what it's demanding politically, given the third seats? Are the fears of the other political parties of the sense of, the kind of political framework in Lebanon that would shake it too much but it can't be done? Or is it just stubbornness? What's stopping it, and should it happen?
Could be bit of both, but I think one has to go back to the basics. This government, and you need to look at the Lebanese parliamentary system. It's semi-republican, semi-parliamentary, but it has a certain middle way whereby you either accept that this parliament was voted and is legitimate, and the people who have the majority in that parliament should form a certain government, keeping in mind the formation of the state, which is what we call consociational democracy, i.e. representation from all or more or less all sects. And when one sect opt out to stay out, okay, the government should fall or not fall. This is a constitutional debate. Now, what is at stake if you give one party who has voiced its opinions about objecting to a lot of the projects of the majority, the parliamentary majority? It's a, I think, question of choice. It's a very delicate, and I mean, the only time that was tested before it was when, you know, at the end of a presidential term, when there was a semi-void where the government in power, which disagreed with that president, was not nominated to take charge, and a parallel government was formed. Now, what assurances, again, when you talk about consociational democracy, there need to be agreement and assurances. And I think to have a veto power in a government by what you call the elected minority in that parliament, despite the consociational need, i.e. you need to have a sect represented in that government. I'm getting mixed up here in the small
I think the
Lebanese
complexity of your answer actually is the answer, really.
It is quite
but because of
complex.
Can I give a more simple one?
You can.
The reason the government didn't want, now the government is ready to give a veto power, but what they want is for there to be an agreement on the presidency as well, because the risk in giving veto power is that then the opposition can bring down the government. And if the opposition brings down the government and there's no session of parliament that takes place, then there are no presidential elections. And before, the reason they didn't want to give a veto power is because they wanted to pass the tribunal, the Hariri tribunal. And had they given veto power, they were certain that the opposition would bring down the government before. Now that the tribunal's been passed by the UN, they're ready to do it, but they won't do it without the presidency.
Okay. I think, just to end, I want to ask one question. It's not, is Lebanon on the brink of civil war? Because I don't think we can answer that, and we haven't answered that, and we don't know. It's on the brink, yes, but whether it actually goes, it's been on the brink a long time. It may stay there a much longer time. But it's a very small country. Lebanon, it doesn't have oil, it doesn't have major kind of interests. It's taken up a huge amount of space in the news and the media over the years. It faded away a bit, now it's bang central again. I've met some Lebanese people who rather pride themselves on this, which seems a bit odd to me really, everybody's interested in us. Well yes, because bad things are happening there more than anything else. But should we be expending this much major attention, this much interest on Lebanon? Is it important enough for this, or is it just a country which has all this colour and interest and it kind of fits into the general Middle East narrative, and it's a good place to tell that story and things are always happening there, so it's always kind of lazy thing to go there all the time? Does it really matter? Is it something we should be talking about to this extent? Is it something that should be on the front page of the newspapers, on the top story, when anything happens, an assassination, whatever? Roula.
It's something I struggle with on a daily basis, so it's interesting you should ask. To a certain extent, I think sometimes it's true that coverage of Lebanon is given perhaps more attention than it should, because Lebanon is an interesting place. On the other hand, I think Lebanon is today covered as part of a broader Middle East story, and the broader Middle East story is of huge interest. And what happens in Lebanon does have implications to the broader struggle in the region, be it between Iran and the US or the Arabs and Iran. So there is a case today for perhaps not putting Lebanon on the front page constantly, but in covering it more.
Would it be better if we just left Lebanon alone a bit to get on with things and didn't give such a platform for all the Lebanese politicians to come back and make their statements and then attack each other's statements and so on and so forth?
The silent majority wouldn't like it. But No, I think Lebanon is important because it represents a certain pluralist model. Does it exist in the world, you know, for different factions, different religious groupings to live together? This microcosm that represents more or less, you know, a variety of people, could it make a nation one day? Could it become a republic? Could it be a government model? So I think, yes, watching Lebanon is quite telling about the region and which direction it's going.
Why does it exert the fascination, Lebanon?
It's wonderful and beautiful and lovely. And something else, let me add to Roula. I agree with Roula, but also journalists love to go. Do you know any British journalist who wouldn't want to go and cover Lebanon, including yourself? No.
I'm always ready to book my ticket.
See?
Okay, thank you very much, Roula. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Badia.